G'day painters. Today we're back to the 40k universe for the first time in a few months, and it's a new project for me. Let's paint. If you've spent any time on the Thousand Sons Reddit or any time looking up how to paint rubrics, you'll know there's a debate on which way you should paint them. Prime with gold and fill in the colour, or prime with the colour and paint the trim. I myself was going back and forth on which way I wanted to do mine. I couldn't decide which would be best, so I figured, why not test both ways? It'll help me make the choice for myself, and hopefully help some of you too. So that's what we're doing. So I have 5 rubrics primed with Retributer Armour from a rattle can, and 5 primed with Diabolic Plum through my airbrush. Obviously, purple isn't the normal colour for Thousand Sons, but I don't think it matters for this test, and I really wanted to do mine purple. I grabbed a pot of Retributer Armour to use for the trim, assuming the pot and rattle can would be similar colours, but they are not. There is a clear difference between the two, which is really annoying. But it shouldn't matter from the tabletop, it should only be noticeable up close. Something I should note early is that I'm not rushing these guys or trying to speed paint them at all. I found myself painting to a deadline pretty often lately, whether to get videos done or to get armies ready for events, and that's not how I like to paint. I like taking my time and just enjoying the process. So since Thousand Sons are models that already take ages to paint, I've decided I'll not be rushing any of them and just enjoying the processes. So while I'm obviously including the times like I do for all my videos, and it'll definitely be good for comparing the two choices, be warned, I spend a long ass time on these guys. That was a lot of talking to have only gotten the first step done for these models, but once I'd blocked in the purple and done the trim, it was time for the accent colour. I thought about using yellow, which is what it normally is for Thousand Sons, and I think that would look fine for the purple, but in the end I decided on an off-white and I think it looks great. I did also debate using orange. I think orange and purple are a great combo too. Since I was having issues with my brush control when I did the Ancient Stone, there was a fair few touch-ups that needed to be done. I also used this as a chance to fix up any mistakes from painting the trim. So, as you'd expect, this step took a fair bit longer for the 5 I started from purple with. Imagine being 16 hours into a project while having only done 3 colours. You'd have to be a nut job. But that's where I found myself. And next it was time for some shading. I started with purple tone to do all of the purple and the off-white parts. Then I used soft tone for all the gold parts. I think I'll be doing this part differently in the future, but I'm going to cover that at the end of the video. There are a number of things I plan to do differently or change, and I think it'll be better to cover it all at the end of the video to save you guys having to try pass through the video to find every change I plan to make. So stay tuned after the final reveal to see what changes I'll be making and what base I've decided I'll be starting from. Almost 20 hours in, we should probably get some more colours on the models so it looks like I've actually done something. I know the tabard parts are normally done off-white, but since I was already using off-white as an accent colour, I wanted to go with something different, and settled on red. While I was looking at my reds, I noticed that the Army Painter Fanatic Range doesn't have like a real rich deep royal red colour, which is fine because I think the warm reds worked great here. I just thought it was interesting that it was something the range is missing. Then with the black, I did all the soft joint parts, so on the wrists, behind the knees, the waist, and the neck. I also did all the pipes with black too. Oh, and the flat part of the guns and both the weapon grips, I should probably mention them too. Death Metal is an interesting colour. It's a very dark metallic with a bit of a goldish tint to it. I wanted a dark metal for the non-gold metallic parts and gave this a shot. I'll be honest, I'm still not 100% sold on it. I think it looks good, but I'd rather it if it was more towards the silver side than the gold, I think. But it's a minor colour and it still looks decent, so no biggie. This went on the gun barrels and the gun stocks, and the small exhaust vents on the backpacks. These aren't actually backpacks. What are they? I should look that up at some point. A problem I ran into on the models that started gold was the black and death metal didn't cover properly, so they both needed some touching up. This wasn't a problem on the purple ones. Next it was time to start on the glowing runes and fuel tanks. I ran into a problem here that was caused when I did the priming. I was having issues with the Retributer Armour when I did the priming and had to do a few coats, which resulted in me losing some of the detail on these runes, which made getting the ink into the runes a real pain. I used white ink for the runes and normal white for the tanks and eyes. Then I used Warp Lightning contrast over the white. I made sure to go out of the lines a bit here to use the Warp Lightning to create a bit of an OSL glow effect. I used this straight out of the plot, though for doing the tanks you could probably thin it down a bit and do 2 layers to get a smoother finish. I wasn't too worried about a smooth finish because I knew I'd get it fixed in the next steps. Speaking of the next step, I break out Rainforest and do some highlights too. With this I do a line on the eyes to build that glow up. Then for the runes I do a thin line down the middle of most of them, and on the tanks I build up the highlights in the middle, leaving the edges the darker green. And then to finish the glow on the fuel tanks, I break out white and do the same as the previous step, just in smaller areas. You could also add some white to the runes and eyes, but I felt they already looked good. Plus, on the day I was doing these, my brush control wasn't the best, so I just decided not to risk it. Once the glow was done, it was time to work on the gems. I start by blocking them all in with Necromancer Cloak. This is from the Warpaints range. The Fanatic range also seems to be missing a really dark grey like this, though I guess deep grey isn't too far off. Originally, I wasn't sure what colour I wanted to do the gems. I was considering orange because, as I mentioned earlier, I think orange and purple is a great combination, but a friend suggested teal, and when I looked at my teals I saw the darker one that I would use called Pharaoh Guard, and it seemed fitting, so I went with teal for my gems. With Pharaoh Guard I block in the bottom 2/3 of the gems. Then the next colour was Aqua Alchemy, which also seems pretty fitting. With this I block in the bottom third of the gems. And then it's white. I'm just doing a tiny dot on the top of the gems in the direction the light would be coming from, then a larger dot inside the Aqua Alchemy to show where the light is coming out of the gem. On the icon bearer for the purple 5, it has this additional gem in the middle of a larger gem. I didn't want to leave them the same colour, so this is where I brought in some orange. I used Molten Lava as the darker orange and Lava Orange as the brighter one. The rest was the same, Necromancer Cloak to block it in and white to finish it off. Then with Magenta Tone I did a wash on the tabards. While I did an all over wash, I was careful to avoid pulling and to move the wash where I wanted it, specifically the deeper parts of the folds. You really don't want pulling here as it just looks terrible on cloth. Then it was time to start highlighting the red. I started with Angelic Red as the first highlight colour, picking out the raised folds and working towards the top of the tabard. I made a mistake here which I'll be covering at the end of the video with the rest of the changes I'll be making. But I'm curious how many of you have picked up on the mistake. If you have, why not drop a comment letting me know. Then with Legendary Red I finished off the highlights, focusing on the edges and inside the highlights I've already established. Finally it was time to glue the models together. When I built them I'd made sure I had the arms paired up. The shoulder pads all come in pairs, so it's easy to spot the pairs even with the way I've been mixing them up as I paint. And while I glue things together, if you're enjoying my video, why don't you give it a like? And if you like my content and want to see more of it, why not hit the subscribe button? These Rubric Marines are part of a slow grow thing I'm doing with some interstate mates. Every 3 months we'll be building and painting 500 points, then we'll get together for a weekend and play some games. So if you're interested in seeing more Thousand Sons videos, there'll be more coming out over the next year as I work on new 500 points every 3 months. Once they were together, I decided I wanted to build more shadows on the golds. So with Strong Tone, I work around each model and strengthen the shadows in select spots. Mostly this is on anything facing downwards, but I also used it in spots with deep recesses where I felt the soft tone from earlier wasn't giving me enough shadow. With metallics, I think building shadows often has more of an impact than building highlights. Because of the way the light naturally bounces off true metallics, it can often mess with your highlights, but that's not a problem with your shadows. Next, I started with Greedy Gold to start off the gold highlights. This step didn't actually take as long as I expected it would. While there is a lot of gold, it's all pretty easy to highlight. It was only around 12 minutes each model. I definitely thought it would take longer. Then with Bright Gold I continued the gold highlights. This was more focused towards the edges and raised parts, working inside the highlights I established in the previous step. And then to finish off the gold highlights, it was a fine edge highlight with Mithril. Any bright silver will work here. I'm mostly just picking out the edges that are facing upwards, but I also hit the end of the beak on the gun too. This step was pretty easy. Pretty much all of it can be done with just running the side of your brush along the edge. Next, with a very watered down gunmetal, I highlight the death metal parts. This is a pretty big jump, so you want to build it up gently so it's not too stark, especially on the gun barrel. It's not so bad on the exhaust ports where you're just doing an edge highlight. Next, it's time to work on the off-white parts. Using pale sand, I work to tidy up spots that got messy from the wash, as well as brighten parts that have darkened too much. So this is more about tidying up than a traditional highlight, but I'm also only doing this on parts that aren't in the shadow. So the parts facing down or shadowed by weapons or arms, I leave alone. So it's like a combination of highlighting and tidying it up. Finally, it's time to start highlighting the purples. For the first layer of highlights, it's Magecast Magenta. I'm using this pretty liberally, only leaving the downwards facing or recessed parts alone. Since this is the first layer for a few layers, you want to cover a decent amount of the purple with it, just leaving your nice shadows where you want them. Then with Warlock Magenta, I continue building the highlights. This layer I'm starting to build the focus of where I want the final highlights to go, as well as finishing off highlights in the lower parts that won't be getting as much light. Also, has anyone noticed how many paints I've used that are like some sort of mage or magical implication? Pharaoh, Alchemy, Magecast, Warlock. This wasn't intentional, but it's sorta cool. Then to continue the pattern of paint names, it's Spellcast Fuchsia. This is the final highlight, and I'm only hitting the top of the shoulder pads, the helmet, and the backpack thing. Just the places that will be receiving the most light. Then the final thing to be painted is the flames on the icon for the gold unit. I start by blocking the flames in with demonic yellow. Then leaving the yellow showing in the deepest parts and parts closest to the base, I use Rainforest for the next layer. Then I went to Angel Green for the next layer. This was too big of a jump and it just didn't look right. So I brought Greenskin in to make it a bit of a smoother transition, leaving Angel Green showing in the tips and the Rainforest and yellow showing in the deeper and lower parts. And that was all 10 finished. I'm really happy with how these guys came out and can't wait to get them on the table. It's probably a good thing I'm happy with them. Could you imagine spending nearly 40 hours on a unit to not be happy with them at the end? That'd be heartbreaking, and it's almost enough to turn you off painting for a while. Well, if you've hung around this long, I assume it's to find out what changes I'll be making for my next batch. So let's go over them. The first and most obvious question is what base will I be using going forward? I plan on using the purple to start, and I'm going to try out doing some minor highlighting with the airbrush to get the purple highlights started. There are three reasons for this decision. First is that I just like the colour of Retributer Armour out of the pot more than I do from the rattle can. The second is I want to get better with the airbrush, and this is a good excuse to practice. And the third is that I had a lot of problems using the Retributer Armour rattle can. I'm sure it was user error, but it was just a pain, and I don't really want to deal with it again. The next thing I think I'll do different is the first shades. I don't think I need to do both the purple shade and the soft tone. I think I'll just do an overall shade of soft tone, and then maybe use the purple tone selectively just between the purple and off-white parts to help with that definition. For doing the white parts on the runes, the difference here is pretty minor, but I think I'll get a better result with a really watered down white acrylic rather than using the ink. I think it'll settle into the recesses of the runes better and just be easier to control and give a better result that doesn't rely so heavily on my brush control, which can be hit and miss depending on the day. The other one I mentioned earlier when highlighting the red. When I did these highlights, the models weren't together and I didn't consider the gun. The top of these red parts are all in shadow because of the guns. I should have highlighted the bottom rather than the top. It's one of those mistakes that you'd never make if the model is together, but it's an easy mistake to make when you're working in sub-assemblies. Funny enough, the next change also has to do with sub-assemblies. I'll be leaving both arms off in the future. This will make the painting slightly easier, but that's not the real reason. When I was gluing them together originally, I paired the arms up and made sure the arm positions were all right and worked with their pairs, but somehow I messed one of them up badly and I could not get him holding the gun properly. This only happened with one of them, but it's easy to avoid that happening in the future by just waiting to put the arms on together at the same time. And the final change is the greedy gold and bright gold. I think I only need to do one of these steps, doing the first highlight with one of these colours, most likely bright gold, then the final edge highlight with mithril is plenty of highlighting. The 2 layers of highlights with the golds is just redundant. And that's it. There's a few changes for my next lot of rubrics, though the next lot of rubrics I paint will be in a few months, so there's always the possibility that I come up with some other changes too. I hope my little experiment has helped you decide which way you want to paint your rubrics, and even given you some ideas for them, or maybe some other models. If you've enjoyed the video and want to see more, hit the like and subscribe buttons. I'm a tiny channel and every like and subscribe helps a lot. Thanks for watching, catch you in the next video.